This is a story about a complex tapestry of lives, and at the heart is a little ski lodge and a big vision for an old mining town. Our story begins in Europe, where a few Americans fall in love with the new sport of skiing.
I've been skiing all over Canada and all over the eastern USA, and I've been skiing all over Europe for 2 years.
Well, the most important thing about Dad is that he was passionate about skiing. He thought it was the most thrilling, invigorating activity that anybody had ever dreamed up. And he wanted to export it from there and import it to the States.
At the 1936 Winter Olympics, Ted Ryan meets Billy Fisk. They begin to discuss a vision for winter sports in the United States, inspired by Bavarian ski culture.
Billy Fisk had quite a reputation. He won a gold medal in the 1928 Olympics for bobsledding. He won another gold medal in the 1932 Olympics and got to carry the American flag at the opening. That was the Lake Placid Olympics, the first Olympics in America. T.J. Flynn, known as Tom Flynn, was an Aspen native. He lived in Aspen as a child because his father owned one of the mines up in the Little Annie Basin called the Toplift Mine.
Why do we have to take a boat ride that takes 6 to 10 days to get to Calais and then on into Austria and so forth? Why can't we find something back in the USA? And there's sort of an agreement, anybody finds one, let's go, let's do something about it.
In the spring of 1936, there was a party in Pasadena, and Tom Flynn from Aspen and Billy Fisk, who was working in Los Angeles at the time, were both there. And they were talking to each other, and Billy Fisk said, there's no place for a ski area in North America. The mountains, there's nothing like Europe. And Flynn, because he had grown up in Aspen and had been up in the Little Annie Basin, said, well, no, wait a minute. You know, the Elk Mountains in Colorado are a lot like Europe. Flynn convinced Fisk that he should have a look.
The summer after that fateful party in Pasadena, the friends meet up to scout the Elk Mountains.
Meanwhile, Tom Flynn had met with Mayor Willoughby, so he asked Willoughby to take them up to the Little Annie Basin and show them around. Billy Fisk recognized that this looked just like the slopes in Europe. It was like the sound of music. It was like, wow. They just fell in love with it immediately. They did a little ceremony at the top. They named some peaks along the ridge, and they buried a little placard underneath one of the rocks saying, well, this is going to be one of the world's greatest ski areas. And within days after that visit, they tasked Tom Flynn and said, good, buy the land at the bottom. So he bought the Highland Ranch and the neighboring property that would get you up into the Little Annie Basin.
Billy got me on the phone and said, Ted, I think we found it. Will you come along? And I said, sure. And we had a little group, which was incorporated as the Highlands Bavarian Corporation. That was the first ski corporation in Pitkin County.
I mean, as part of all that, they actually then built the Highlands Bavarian Lodge.
Flynn moved to Aspen and got to work. Because he knew Aspen, he was tasked with the job of making everything happen in Aspen.
We built our lodge fast. We wanted to get it going.
Architect Gordon Kaufman from Pasadena, California, designed the rustic-style lodge using stick-built construction with a manufactured log veneer. Jimmy Brodero, an artist working for Disney Studios, created a decorative motif in the gable ends, and his wife selected the interior decor to complete the European-inspired chalet-style lodge. It included a large hearth in the center and 2 bunk rooms for their many guests.
This was going to be a lodge-headquarters. The location of the lodge was picked because it was directly at the bottom of the Little Annie Basin.
Flynn and Ryan cut a ski run at the bottom of Little Annie Basin in the summer of 1936, that connected back to the property. This short run became the first ski run cut in Pitkin County.
It was ready to go for the winter season.
The Highlands Bavarian Lodge was the first step towards this vision of an entire ski village and was to serve as the first phase of development that would support skiing on Richmond Hill.
We're in the process of developing an entire ski area, not where Aspen is located now, but actually up where there is now the ghost town of Ashcroft.
We laid plans and had architects going on the larger hotel, the middle hotel, the little hotel, the post office, the sports shops. And there we laid out bob runs because Bill was a great bobsled runner. And we had skating rinks and skating waiters envisioned. And we had the whole works of a good European thing set in that valley.
The investors, especially Ryan and Fisk, thought, well, we've gone this far, maybe we should have an expert tell us if we've picked the right spot. So that's when they brought in Andre Roche and Dr. Gunther Langes. Dr. Gunther Langes was an avalanche and snow expert from Italy. Andre Roche had a lifetime of mountain climbing, and he was passionate about skiing, and he was able to make everyone around him love the sport, and he was a good ski instructor.
We had Roche here for that full year, 36 and 37, and he scouted all the mountains around here.
My father showed them around the valley, took them to different places, and he brought his brother Frank, who was a better skier and more interested in skiing, looking for different snow conditions. They even climbed Castle Peak. That was the first winter ascent of Castle Peak. The conclusion that Roche came up with was that Little Annie Basin was a wonderful place to have a ski area, but the snow was not that good.
If you'll move up the valley 6 miles and acquire the valley of Ashcroft, which is this that we see out here, and reach into the Hayden area and the Castle Peak and the Pearl Pass and the Cooper Basin and the Star Mountain and an Italian mountain area, you'll have something that will be better than anything we've got in Switzerland.
And there you really would have skiing like Europe. Long 3, 4, 5 mile runs.
And our intent was to attract people who might invest in making Aspen a ski area to come and see what it was all about.
Over the next few years, the partners begin a national marketing campaign to bring people to the lodge and see the perfect area they had chosen. They start the Roaring Fork Winter Sports Club to teach people to ski and gain community support.
Originally, the idea was to form a club that would have skating and bobsledding in Aspen. And Frank Willoughby was chosen as the president.
It's himself and Frances, his sister, and his brother. They all basically kind of were the first members of the Winter Sports Club, the AVSC precursor.
They invite experts like Otto Schneebs, the father of American skiing.
His role was primarily as the ski coach at Dartmouth College. He wrote several books about skiing.
They hold a winter carnival and host the very first races in February of 1937.
The first race was held above the Highlands Bavarian Lodge in the field above it. The partners cut a pathway through the trees into the Little Annie Basin. And then from that, the ski club would go on to host many races.
The news begins to spread. Billy Fisk has Hollywood connections, so they invite celebrities like Jack Oakey.
He actually came back a number of times. He said he really liked Aspen because he wasn't hounded by autograph seekers.
And on the East Coast, Robert Benchley writes a how-to Aspen to help spread the word of this now American pastime. Everything was moving along smoothly. Now they needed to build the 2 tramways.
Both Fisk and Ryan had pretty deep pockets, but not the kind of money that was estimated it would cost to build the first 2 lifts.
They recruited Lowell Thomas.
Good evening, everybody. The White House announces that there will be no new statement until tomorrow. This means, of course, that discussions by radio telephone are being held.
He had one of the most popular daily radio shows in the country.
Lowell Thomas lobbied the Colorado legislature on behalf of the Highlands Bavarian Corporation to get a loan to build the lifts.
And this was unusual because skiing was a totally new industry, and very few people could think of a way to make money from it.
And the loan was granted.
We didn't really have our hearts in it because we could see that America was going to get into this war before too long.
A perfect storm of events leads to the end of the Highlands Bavarian Corporation and the end of a grand vision for Ashcroft.
And then Pearl Harbor happened.
And of course, all of us individually went off to our wars, wherever we could get into it.
Immediately, Billy Fisk volunteered for the Royal Air Force, and he was one of the very first pilots from America to actually be killed in the war. He was shot down. Fisk was the motivator within the partners. He was the flamboyant person. He was the energy person who drove much of what was happening.
It looked as if that was the end of things for him. He'd lost his great friend and muse, the glamorous athlete Billy Fisk. So I'm not at all surprised that he closed down. My father wrecked himself on a tree up in the Laurentians, and he took the last run of the day one day, blew his knee apart, and he was in traction for 1 full year after that.
The skiing accident left Ted Ryan ineligible to fight overseas. But his broken knee did not slow down his patriotism.
So Ryan went to the military.
I offered them Ashcroft properties for $1 for the duration of the war to train ski troops on.
The Army took Ryan up on his offer.
Because if I could get them to come out and have a taste of Aspen, I think they'll come back after the war and like it.
Well, first of all, the 10th Mountain Division, 87th Regiment, actually would come over here quite a bit for their training ops. They would also come here on their weekends to visit because they were encouraged to come here.
They were welcomed in Aspen. The Hotel Jerome put them up. The Midnight Mining Company helped them by hauling them up the mountain so that they could ski down.
No, I came here many times on weekends strictly just to ski. And also there were no MPs in town, and so you could relax, you know. If you got drunk and fell down, well, who cared, you know, it made no difference.
It was what Ted Ryan here had developed prior to the war. It was one of the strongest reasons we came here and why Friedel came here.
One in particular, Friedel Pfeiffer, he actually kept coming back on his weekends. And then right after he was released from the Army, he came back in fall of 1945. And actually, he's the one who worked with Percy Rideout and Johnny Litchfield, also 10th Mountain Division soldiers, to develop the first ski school here in Aspen. And then they all worked together with D.R.C. Brown and Walter Pepka to develop the Aspen Skiing Corporation that was then incorporated in 1946.
The boys were ahead of me here on this mountain, and I better lay back on Mount Hayden, so I couldn't lick them, so I joined them.
And by the time we had 4 or 5 million skiers in the country, it was better to be a little remote and not get overrun by weekend skiers and sort of scare away the regular tourists, which we really were building for.
You could say that my father was a major influencer in the cultural shift.
Amongst the rapid growth of Aspen and Pitkin County, the Highlands Bavarian Lodge is still standing, holding space for what is now a thriving ski and outdoor recreation culture. The Highlands Bavarian partners saw the potential of the Elk Mountains, brought in the experts to determine where the best skiing was, promoted the culture of skiing across the country, and set the stage for what is now one of the most famous ski areas on the planet. All thanks to this little cabin in the valley.